individuals earning over 50,000 reais per month, which adds up to more or less $100,000 a year. And this is so, it means a minimum effective tax, which means that today, those individuals, although they are very much at the higher echelons of income in Brazil, they pay much less than 10%. So this is something that we're working on. So no wonder that we appreciate very much the support we had last year to discuss the issue of tax and progressiveness, and also we applaud the efforts, the ongoing efforts at the OECD to take also the BEPS agenda into a discussion also on to build a consensus around tax and inequality. We think also to build tax capacity is very important. And in this context, we applaud, for example, the Forum on Tax Administration. We also think it's very important to continue with greater coordination between tax administrations. I would like to then encourage measures to improve transparency, reinforce compliance, including in such examples as country-by-country reports and crypto asset reporting framework. In the context of technical assistance, we highlight initiatives such as the Platform for Collaboration on Tax and the Tax Inspectors Without Borders, which has been mentioned here. We also think it's crucial to build momentum in the ambitious agenda for the 4th Conference on Financing for Development. We are a strong partner and support for that. So to keep with my time, I will conclude by saying that by advancing national reforms, expanding cooperation among tax authorities, and leveraging international frameworks, including G20, governments can create more effective and fair tax systems for the 21st century. And we hope G20 can continue to increase its work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. I would now like to invite Honorable Eric Lombard, Finance Minister from France. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Kieswetter, for moderating this panel, and congratulations to South Africa for the marvelous organization of this G20. Thank you to Kristalina, Jai, and Amina for having put together the scene. It is a key element for G20 members, and France is totally dedicated to help and to go alongside with developing countries in putting together strong domestic resources mobilization and their program with the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, to which we contribute. But let's face it, the Sustainable Development Goals through 2030 will mobilize an annual $4 trillion, and official development assistance is only, if I may say so, 200 billion, effectively key. I had a meeting in Senegal with various government officials, and the head of Internal Revenue Service was made head of the saving institution of Senegal. And he told me it's much easier finally to raise taxes than to mobilize savings. And I'm not sure it is totally true, actually, when I see what's happening. And in that regard, I think it's very important that we work together on the development of more effective tax policies to ensure a fair distribution of the tax burden and encourage productive investment. That's really a challenge. And also, and this has been said by colleagues, to modernize the tax and customs administration to improve revenue collection and enhance transparency. And in that regard, the Financing for Development Conference that will take place in Spain in July 25 will be an important event. But I also believe, speaking about tax, that international cooperation in anti-money laundering is also absolutely key, because of course money laundering is a way to escape taxation, and I believe that mutual assistance there is very important in exchanging financial intelligence, criminal asset recovery, and access to beneficial ownership registries. And in that regard, France will host in June 25 a dedicated forum on technical assistance cooperation emerging on FATF plenary meeting that will take place in Strasbourg. And I believe that supporting FATF is also a way to contribute to internal revenue generation for the countries that need more revenue to finance their development. I won't be any longer on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister Lombard. No, you may. So now our next speaker, Ambassador Machunga from the African Union. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator and the fellow Commissioner. I'm very happy to be here in this panel discussion. And for us in Africa, the issue of domestic resource mobilization is gaining prominence. This is because our heads of state and government last week adopted the strategic framework on key actions to achieve inclusive growth and sustainable development in Africa. Rising levels of investments relative to the gross domestic product is key element of this strategic framework. And domestic resource mobilization is very cardinal in facilitating the required investments. Against this background, we need full and effective cooperation of the G20 and the other countries to establish a more inclusive, just, and effective international tax system. We, in this respect, call on all the G20 members to welcome the work of the United Nations for a framework convention on international tax cooperation. We also call on the G20 to enhance exchange of information. In this respect, we are working with the African Tax Administration Forum, which you chair. In addition, we look forward to the G20 to cooperate with us on the issue of international, in the issue of elimination of illicit financial flows from Africa, as well as the issue that requires to end aggressive tax avoidance and also eliminate imbalances in the taxing rights. With these reforms, the G20 can steer the world towards tax justice, which we very much need. In the previous breakfast meeting, there was a call to action. This is one of the issues where we need to act with resolve and urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now move from my left to my right, and that has nothing to do with any ideological positioning. This is just how the seats panned out. So let me introduce the Vice Minister of Finance, Indonesia, Honorable Thomas Jiwandono.
Thank you, Commissioner. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to the Chair for inviting me to express and share to all of you today Indonesia's experiences at the subject at hand. We believe strongly that as far as strengthening tax administrations are concerned, there are three thematics that need to be addressed holistically. The first is capacity building. The second is usage and leveraging of technology. And the third is international cooperation. As far as capacity building is concerned, Indonesia believes that the G20, by working together, can provide technical assistance, training programs, as well as knowledge-sharing platforms with the intent of enhancing human capital within these tax administrations, which at the end of the day improves tax collections and reduces revenue leakages. As far as leveraging technology, Indonesia believes that the G20 can support adoption of e-filing systems, risks assessments, as well as real-time transaction monitoring. These will enhance the streamlining of tax administrations and mitigate tax evasions. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, international cooperation. We believe that the G20 can strengthen the exchange of information agreements, the promotion of fair tax treaties, and the support and implementation of the two-pillar solution. This, we believe, is critical to ensuring developing nations to secure fair share of tax revenues. So, to summarize, in our efforts to strengthen tax administration, we take into account these three crucial themes that we believe is paramount to addressing those issues. Now, by investing in training and skill development, Indonesia has enhanced enforcement capabilities and improved taxpayer services. The adoption of digital platforms and data-driven systems has allowed us to optimize processes and minimize administrative burdens. And lastly, and furthermore, active participation in international cooperation has enabled Indonesia to integrate global best practices while adapting them to our specific needs. I thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister. If I had to hazard a guess, you almost sounded like a tax commissioner with many of the practical suggestions you make. Thank you very much. Let me now hand the floor to Ms. Manal Corwin, Director for the OECD Center for Tax Policy and Administration. Manal, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, Excellencies, and distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be here to share some of our experiences. I think in our experience, strengthening tax administrations so that they can efficiently and effectively collect revenues is really at the heart of mobilizing and maximizing the mobilization of domestic resources. The OECD partners with the IMF, the World Bank, and the United Nations through the platform for collaboration on tax, as well as with regional partners to enhance the capacity of developing country tax administrations. The demand for OECD capacity building initiatives on tax is incredibly high. We reach tens of thousands of officials annually through our range of e-learning, multilateral workshops, and bilateral programs, including joint sessions with the UN on tax treaties. Our Academy for Tax and Financial Crime Investigation, with centers in Italy, Kenya, Argentina, and Japan, as well as pilots in India and Togo, has trained over 3,300 financial crime investigators from close to 170 countries. The Global Forum on Tax Transparency, with over 170 members, has an extensive capacity building and outreach program, including tailored regional initiatives. In 2024, for example, 79 developing countries received bilateral technical assistance. This program also supports efforts to combat tax evasion and illicit financial flows. Between 2009 and 2023, developing countries identified 45 billion euro in additional revenue due to exchange of information. Some of the most valued support is peer-to-peer learning conducted through our joint OECD-UNDP Tax Inspectors Without Borders initiative, together with regional partners, notably the African Tax Administration here in Africa, who provide critical leadership and expertise. By 2024, the Tax Inspectors Without Borders initiative had generated $2.3 billion in additional revenues in developing countries through providing experienced officials to work hand in hand with tax administrations to invest in their human resources. It also promotes South-to-South cooperation with over 25 programs launched so far. In this regard, I'd particularly like to acknowledge South Africa and India's leadership. So facilitating the sharing of experience among countries is at the core of part of the work of the OECD Forum on Tax Administration as well, which many have also mentioned, which brings together officials, commissioners from around the world to share common challenges and good practices. So I think the experience has shown and that it's clear that international organizations working together and with regional partners have a really important role to play in supporting developing countries to further strengthen their tax administration and support them in meeting the domestic resource mobilization goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. Let me hand over the floor now to the sixth speaker, Mr. Gerasimos Thomas, EU Directorate, General Taxation and Customs Union. Gerasimos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and apologies for Commissioner Dombrovskis that had to stay in Brussels today. I mean, in the EU we have a Team Europe approach, and we foster the collaboration between the EU and its member states in order to serve the needs of the countries for capacity building. Our approach aligns partner countries' priorities and promotes coordination with other development partners, and promotes the international cooperation agenda, like implementation of international agreements that was mentioned as very important in the current context. Our approach is an internal part of the strategy for sustainable and inclusive connectivity and infrastructure. Our purpose is to mobilize all possible financial resources for development, domestic, international, public, and private. Within this, domestic revenue mobilization is crucial for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and reducing aid dependency. I give you 3 examples where we provide financing: the EU's Collect More and Spend Better initiative. This strategy supports partner countries' efforts on domestic revenue mobilization in line with our commitments, including under the Addis Tax Initiative Declaration. The EU has deployed 219 million in EU support for domestic revenue mobilization in partner countries between 2021 and 2023. This support prioritizes reforms of tax administrations and digitalization of tax administrations. Second, the EU, together with Finland, France, Germany, and Sweden, we are leading a Team Europe initiative to combat illicit financial flows, including tax-related money laundering and counter-terrorism financing in Africa. This initiative promotes coordination between us and African partners across over 70 bilateral, regional, and continental programs worth more than 450 million euros. Third, we contribute 15 million to the IMF's Global Public Finance Partnership, supporting the work in IMF that was elaborated earlier on in capacity development. 14 million goes to domestic resource mobilization activity. We particularly welcome the Presidency's focus on addressing tax gaps as a way to ensure more effective and efficient tax systems. This is a priority, including in our origin, to fight tax gaps, and our experience with increased digitalization and data availability, coupled with artificial intelligence tools, tells us that much more can be done in this area and much more quickly. Finally, strengthening the link between the G20 domestic resource mobilization agenda and other processes like the Financing for Development Conference taking place in June is essential, and therefore we have to work together to work for improving the design of domestic tax systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerasimos. So it is now 11:36. I would like to invite the broader participation first, and then we'll see how we do time. I'd like to signpost that we may have time to come back to the panel for a closing remark after the open session. But what I would like to say is, certainly from the South African experience, we have found that digitalization and specifically the introduction of artificial general intelligence and the agentification technologies that are available gives developing countries the opportunity to leapfrog. And in fact, because they don't have the legacy to do even better than developed countries. And I think that's a wonderful time and opportunity for us. I would like now to open the floor and first invite a few speakers who have indicated their willingness to make a contribution, I would ask for a minute each, and then I will, after that, request that you raise your hand, and I will invite you to speak. So first up, the Minister of Finance from Russia, Anton Silunov. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will speak Russian. Донастройка налоговой системы, естественно, должна заключаться не в повышении налогового бремени. Для этого мы видим необходимо делать упрощенными и легкими правила администрирования для налогоплательщиков. Для тех экономик развивающихся стран, которые базируются на ресурсной экономике, необходимо уделять внимание рентным платежам при добыче полезных ископаемых с привязкой к мировым ценам, что важно. Для аграрных экономик это могут быть также экспортные пошлины на сельскохозяйственную продукцию, также с привязкой к мировым ценам. В части корпоративного налогообложения, повышения собираемости, согласен с коллегами, которые говорят о необходимости минимизации налоговых льгот, но если они есть, необходимо оценивать их эффективность ежегодно, а если мы говорим об отмене льгот, то можно их заменить адресными субсидиями. В части налогообложения физлиц необходимо, на наш взгляд, использование агентской модели уплаты этого налога, то есть уплаты через налогоплательщиков, через работодателей. И для тех, кто зарабатывает своим собственным трудом, это малый бизнес, возможно создание специальных налоговых режимов с небольшими ставками налога, с легким администрированием, в том числе через мобильные приложения, которые сегодня доступны, или с определением налоговых обязательств в автоматическом режиме на стороне налоговых органов. Такие режимы в России работают и показали свою эффективность. Ну, конечно, цифровизация по косвенным налогам, согласен с коллегами, что за счет внедрения электронных счетов и электронных касс можно получить более 1% ВВП дополнительных доходов от администрирования. Поэтому, уважаемые друзья, коллеги, предложение. Давайте выработаем для тех стран, которые находятся сегодня в сложной ситуации, с долговыми проблемами, страны, в том числе развивающиеся, для таких ряда стран выработаем конкретные решения по совершенству налогового администрирования с учетом нашего опыта. Я думаю, что это будет хороший вклад в поддержку задачи снижения долга. Спасибо.
Thank you, Russia. I now would like to recognize the State Minister of Finance, Japan, Mr. Hiroki Saito.
Thank you. Please use your headset. 財政の安定と経済成長を実現しながら、貧困や援助への依存を減らすことは、すべての国にとって重要な政策課題です。その観点から、国内の歳入基盤の拡充と、税の執行能力の強化による国内資金動員の向上が重要です。こうした観点から日本はこれまで二国間や国際機関を通じた税務行政の改善等を目的とする技術協力を人材や資金面から支援してきました。実効的効率的な支援のため、日本として重要と考える点を3つ述べます。まず、税制や税務当局の状況は各国で異なるため、支援対象国のニーズの正確な把握が重要です。これにより、ドナー側は効率的な支援を提供でき、途上国はより効果的な支援を期待できます。IMF、世界銀行、OECD、国連による税に関する共同のためのプラットフォームは、この分野での国際機関間の連携強化に取り組んできましたが、そのさらなる機能強化は有用であり、G20 としてもサポートしていくべきです。PCT の機能強化においては、途上国、先進国の税の専門家が集まり、国際機関とともに継続的な対話を行い、税分野の能力開発にかかる課題と解決の方向性を共有することが重要です。日本はこうした対話の場の構築に貢献していきます。南アフリカ議長会における今回のイベントをきっかけに、税による DRM 強化のための議論が深まることを大いに期待しております。ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Japan. I now would like to invite the Minister of Finance, Turkey, Mehmet Simsek. You have the floor.
Well, thank you. Much of the ground has been covered. I think the key, one question that I'd like to raise is that with all this hype around generative AI, is someone familiar with someone developing a model in which we could deploy generative AI to actually, go through data and write the first draft of tax audit report, send questions to clients, and maybe get the feedback and accordingly, help us. I mean, right now, most of the time, tax audits cover 1% of, taxpayers. So is there a way where we could expand that using generative AI? So that's really more of a question rather than a comment. Thank you.
I guess the answer is yes to all of the above, and South Africa has begun to dabble in that. It's exciting, but also intimidating. Recognize by show of hands, if I can ask if you could introduce yourself, and sir, you have the floor. If you could just introduce yourself, and if you could, 1 minute to give others time as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Clever Gatete. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. And I really find this one very, very important, and I wish we had more from the developing countries, because the experience, as personally I worked in Canada, and I worked in Africa, and the experience was quite totally different. And that's why this is very, very important for developing countries. In Africa now, the tax to GDP ratio is 15.8%. And that one is too low by any standards. And that's why we are saying that everything that has been said, from the capacity building that you even yourself mentioned, to the informal sector, coming to the formal sector, in some countries it's now 80% informality that is there. And also the technology. Every country, most countries are now getting the electronic billing machines. They are now used to that. But also there are other issues of international cooperation which has to do with transfer pricing, misinvoicing, illicit financial flows that also need to be consulted. But also one of the biggest problems, and has been said I think by the managing director of the IMF, is this issue of blanket incentives that are coming in. But I wanted just to highlight one point, that as we all know what is supposed to be done, and we are doing it in the countries, what is very important is cooperation. Let me give 2 examples. One example is the training. The IMF has AfriTax in Africa, so many of them. We have a training center based in Senegal, which trains in so many other countries. We need to work together to make sure that we support the training as far as taxation is concerned. Secondly, the issue of, it's not just resources for the government, but it's also resources for the private sector. The issue mentioned by the President of the World Bank in terms of the capital market development is very, very critical, because most of our institutions are not well rated. They depend on the domestic savings that are mobilized, and building a capital market becomes very important. There is an initiative that the World Bank had started for East Africa, linking Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda in terms of having a common trading platform. And this was to build the whole East Africa as a market so that you can bring in other people from outside. But the World Bank has been working on that alone. But in the case of Rwanda, where I was a finance minister for a long time, we are finding that we are working with the World Bank separately from Milken Institute, separately from the UK DFID. And then coming together, working together becomes very critical, and that's when you can make a difference. So that an initiative that is taken by the region can help others, not only the big companies, but also the small companies that are coming in the system. So this becomes very important. That's why we need international cooperation. And this one we can make it. We are doing it as the Economic Commission for Africa, working for all the 54 countries on the continent on a daily basis, but working with our partners and development partners and making sure that we focus on this issue, of which we all know what is supposed to be done. But we need now to be coordinated in terms of supporting our member countries to increase their domestic resources mobilization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I would like to just point out also that we have the Africa Tax Administration Forum. We invite African countries to join up with that. We also have the various initiatives that we certainly can talk about afterwards. Let me look for a show of hands. I've been to the center, I've been to the left, let me come to the right. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Yasser Sobe. I'm Vice Minister of Finance for Egypt. Just a few points that domestic resource mobilization remains a priority, and really many EMDs have made recently significant progress, are continuing to do so. Policies must be carefully designed to mobilize revenue while limiting inflationary pressures and fostering growth, which is very important for sustainability. We believe that widening the tax base and leveraging digitalization are essential, while measures that take into account challenges faced by businesses are key to building trust and confidence in the tax system. I can share with you some of the experience recently done by Egypt in this regards, including the streamlining of tax exemptions and for state-owned enterprises, limiting inefficient exemptions, but also introducing a package of 20 measures to simplify the tax system, to regain the confidence of taxpayers in the tax system, and aimed in particular to integrate voluntarily the informal sector. Also, the introduction of e-invoices, payroll, and e-payments have contributed significantly to increase tax revenue by around 40% this year. So we are continuing the same trend in other customs and property taxes as well. So widening the tax base, embracing digitalization, and ensuring predictability in the tax policies, I think we can enhance domestic revenue mobilization efforts while fostering sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you. When we design these sessions, we are always over-ambitious. I'm going to allow 3 more minutes for input. So let me recognize the gentleman in front. Thank you.
Okay, it's Liao Min from China. So thank you so much for this wonderful discussion about DRM this morning. So we learned a lot from our discussions. I have one comment and one question. One comment, I think the green development also brings a lot of challenges and opportunities for the revenue and expenditures. So I'm not sure any panelists can share your thoughts and experiences in this regard. I mean, the green development it's happening and bring a lot of challenges and opportunities for our tax revenue. One question is, I think based on our discussion, I think we all agree capacity building, digitalization, international cooperation is very important for a country. So my question is, for the G20 and the G20 member countries, I think the seminar training program provided to the developing countries is very important. But what G20 can do to ensure there is the much better implementation for all these best practices in all the 3 areas. I think at the end, how to make sure we can help the developing countries to have a better implementation for this all these best practices, if there's any best practices at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I can take one more contribution. Let me recognize the gentleman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank South Africa for inviting us. My name is Wale Edun, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Nigeria. This is a critically important topic, and I think one of the most important aspects is the cross-country learning experience that we can gather. And what I would like to contribute is the current experience of Nigeria. We're in the middle of major macroeconomic reforms, and at the heart of it is domestic resource mobilization. First of all, removing wasteful subsidies, but close behind that is a major tax reform exercise to move tax to GDP up from 10% to doubling it virtually to 18% in the first instance. And a major tool is technology. So it was very interesting to hear, I think it was Turkey talk about the role of AI that it may play in helping in tax administration, tax auditing, and so forth. So we actually have a reform, a set of bills to reform the policy and strategy and administration of tax. And I think it may be a learning experience as it goes through our parliament. We may have lessons and things that others can learn from. And of course, we continue to look to our development partners for help and guidance, particularly as we try and communicate some of these changes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's now resource allocation. So let me invite my panelists to make their final remarks. And if I can ask you to restrict it to 90 seconds. Else, this time I'll start on my far right.
Yeah, thank you. I think important points have been made regarding the technology, the use of technology, and I think it is important and difficult for tax administrations to manage the new technologies and not have digital devices. Within the EU, for example, within the EU 27 member states, we started developing e-invoicing, and in the beginning, different systems developed, and then there is a reluctancy of the different member states to harmonize the systems after their initial development. So the adoption of new technologies has also challenges as we are moving to more common and coordinated approaches, and people in tax administrations are not used to manage technology that is evolving in such a fast pace. Therefore, the use of G20 guidelines and framework is extremely important early on. I think on broadening the tax base, it's a very important aspect that we have to look beyond, let's say, the areas of personal income taxation. We have areas of excise duties, we have VAT, we have different taxes that obviously serve different local situations, but I think the range of experiences with broadening the tax base is extremely important to be discussed and shared among the members. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are agile. The Minister of Finance of France, Mr. Lombard, have asked to be excused at 12, so I will invite him to make his closing remarks.
Thanks very much. I appreciate. I believe it's a very important issue, and we have first to address the question of base erosion and profit shifting, because that's really a challenge, and that has been addressed by Madame Corwin as well. And we totally support the initiative led by OECD. We believe that the cost to countries of base erosion is in the range of 100 to 240 billion euro annually, which is the equivalent of 4 to 10% of the global income tax revenue. So that is absolutely huge. In that regard, the two-pillar solution that is negotiated at the OECD is something that we strongly support, and the whole European Union is supporting that initiative, with Pillar 2 giving a new tool to all jurisdictions to collect more revenue from large multinational corporations, where we believe that 28% of profits are estimated to be under-taxed in the world, which is huge. And also, of course, Pillar 1, which also have a wide-ranging impact by reallocating substantial tax rights to market jurisdiction. I want also to stress that the initiative on wealthy individuals, which is a very important point, and equality is one of the targets of this G20 summit, and equality, of course, means we need a fair taxation of wealthy individuals following the Brazilian presidency and the declaration of Rio de Janeiro a few years ago. And on the top of that, global solidarity levies also should be part of the agenda, and I invite G20 countries to join the conversation. That can be only efficient if it is levied on a broad-based that is, of course, beyond our 20 member states. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Let me revert to the OECD.
Thank you very much. I think a common theme in all of the comments is what is clear is that maximizing domestic resource mobilization will require a multi-pronged approach that considers, among other factors, all potential revenue sources, enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of tax administration to close tax gaps, as we've discussed, as well as addressing informality and understanding the interactions with sustainable growth are also going to be critical considerations. With respect to revenue sources, focusing on a single source of tax revenue will not generate the magnitude of financing necessary to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, and Erasmus, you identified that as well. Recent international collaboration has already generated results with respect to the corporate income tax. As referenced, the BEPS initiative, in particular the early BEPS minimum standards, have strengthened international standards to reduce tax avoidance and prevent base erosion, allowing countries to protect their corporate tax bases. The global minimum tax has raised the floor for minimum taxation of cross-border profits to help level the playing field, but importantly reduce the pressure on giving away wasteful incentives. However, maximizing the mobilization of domestic resources will require looking beyond the corporate income tax. While personal income taxes and Social Security contributions currently generate lower revenues in developing countries than in developed countries, these taxes do have powerful revenue-raising capacities and require greater attention. In doing so, it will be important to take into account their equity, informality, and labor force impacts. So ongoing efforts are important there. Also, VAT and consumption taxes form a significant share of revenues in most countries, and they are a main source of revenues for many developing countries and need attention as well. Finally, reducing informality and improving the effectiveness and efficiency of tax administration, as we've already referenced, are really at the core of mobilizing domestic resources and work hand in hand with policy changes relating to widening the tax base. Reducing tax-induced hurdles to formalization, implementing well-designed presumptive tax regimes, and supporting digital transformation of tax administrations, I think, present critical opportunities for us to work together.
Thank you, Manal. Let me hand the floor now to Vice Minister Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished guests, Indonesia's tax reform has been based on 5 guiding principles. The first, human resource development, has been intended to ensure competency and a credible workforce. Organizational restructuring that is meant to be adaptive and efficient. The third is business process transformations that focuses on simplification and digital integration, followed by investing in technology that improves overall compliance. But this, and lastly, perhaps the most important in our view, is regulatory reform that provides legal certainty and produces a good investment climate. In this sense, Indonesia believes that domestic resource mobilization is not just about revenue collection, but also it's about fostering a sustainable business environment and which increases investments. A key aspect of this is tax expenditure management and targeted incentives. Indonesia has been refining its approach to tax incentives, ensuring they are aligned with national priorities. In this case, supporting medium to small scale enterprises, encouraging investment in strategic sectors, and fostering innovation. To reinforce all of this, Indonesia has undertaken structural reforms to improve the business climate, such as through the omnibus law that we did a few years back. This simplifies regulations, reduces bureaucratic hurdles, and enhances investment attractiveness. These reforms ensure that tax policy supports economic competitiveness while strengthening domestic revenue mobilization. By aligning tax incentives with broader economic goals and creating a more business-friendly environment, Indonesia continuously aims to achieve a sustainable and resilient economy. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me now hand to Ambassador Muchanga. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Three quick points. The first one is on the issue of digitalization. We welcome it and we're working on it. But there's also one challenge that actually two challenges that we need to meet. The first one is inadequate supply of energy. Quite a number of times our equipment gets broken down because of power outages. So that's an investment that we need to work, and we welcome the collaboration between the World Bank and the African Development Bank to try to resolve this issue. And the other one related to that is in quite a number of our areas, we still need to come up with infrastructure to reach the outer rural areas so that we cover everybody. Yes, we agree that we needed to move beyond the collection of revenues. So at the level of the African Union, we have secured the approval of the Assembly, and that was actually in 2023, to come up with the African Exchange Linkages project, which is currently linking 9 stock exchanges across Africa. And that is contributing to growth of liquidity among the countries involved. My last point is to totally agree with you, Chairperson, that we are dealing with the crime syndicates when we address the issue of illicit financial flows. One key area is on the issue of the smuggling of gold. Our estimate is that throughout Africa, we lose about $30 billion a year as a result of direct smuggling of gold. And this is one thing we are working on with our member states. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ambassador Rosito, I started with you, I end with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. So in my initial remarks, I think I focused a lot on what we have been doing in Brazil in terms of tax reforms. But I would like to close alluding to, a more forward-looking scenario, and with our, let's say, hat this year, going to COP30. So I would like to echo, although Minister Lombard is not here, I would like to echo, his first words and reminding us all that, of the $1.3 trillion that are to be mobilized to developing countries by 2035. This was the agreement in COP29, and we share with our Azerbaijani colleagues this hat to work towards this roadmap, and we'll be doing it along the year towards November. So behind this 1.3 trillion, actually, we have twice this amount or even more, 2.5 in domestic resource mobilization. And this is so crucial for allowing also the international flows to flow to developing countries, because a lot will depend also on the capacity to leverage public investments, to attract more private capital, to have more infrastructure. So the conversation that we start here today is crucial for that. And I also want to allude to the Global Solidarity Revised Task Force, where other taxes, global taxes, have been under discussion, now including on ultra-high net worth individuals. But I think those things also go hand in hand. Our capacity to mobilize more domestically can change the picture for those taxes that have been also discussed and explored. So I just want to conclude by joining the voice of Brazil to those that have emphasized capacity building, and also commend you to start this dialogue very early today in South Africa's first ministers meeting. And shall we try to focus that, along the year, so that we have another agenda, very clear agenda, emerging from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. So we've been listening carefully, and we've tried to do some real-time capturing. I'd like to ask the panel just to what did we hear from the various presenters? I think just 10 common themes appear to emerge, that high levels of tax debt places greater reliance on tax revenues. We are all debted out. Low tax to GDP levels means that there's more revenue to collect. Tax policies must distribute tax burden equitably. Quality of spending matters. Reminding ourselves that tax is a blunt instrument and that we must limit incentives and credits. That modernization is key. There's some practical proposals that we need to be aware of the arbitrage between statutory and effective tax rates, which clearly gives rise to the whole notion of minimum tax. International cooperation, I don't think we can argue. Inclusiveness and representativity matters. Green taxation and sustainability is important for us. And then we have been alerted to the upcoming conference. What we did just in preparing also, as moderator, put together some thoughts that I think are good to converge. The first is, I think, the recognition that the most effective way to fund government programs remain domestic resource mobilization. It's the lowest cost of funding, whether it's from taxes, SOE dividends, or other forms, and that must be our first prize. From a policy perspective, simplicity, equity, fairness, and inclusivity. If you cannot administer it, it's not a good policy. And then from an administrative perspective, if you cannot administer it, then policies will be arbitraged. And then the healthy balance between 2 and 3, within an impeccable, unquestionable system of governance, builds public trust and promotes the ultimate goal of voluntary compliance. Funding administrations is key. I think that came through, and that ministries of finance must see it as a long-term investment towards sustainable fiscal integrity. Modernization is inescapable. We have seen that for those of us who work in this field every day, and preparing ourselves, our people, embracing technology and AI is key. And then collaborating with each other, as we do very well within the OECD, within the FTA, within the various network organizations, has helped us to accelerate our own learning, share best practices, but also collaborate in terms of enforcement. And then I normally say a tax risk anywhere is a tax risk everywhere. Don't think you are isolated, and therefore international cooperation is an essential pillar of DRM, particularly now to address issues of redefining taxing rights, as we've seen the inclusive framework tries to achieve as the digitalization of economies have progressed. The exchange of information is absolutely necessary, otherwise we cannot enforce. Mutual assistance in administration and prosecution and dealing with issues such as BEPS and IFF and other harmful practices is absolutely key. And so none of us are isolated or vaccinated against a tax risk. If it's somewhere, it's everywhere. And then lastly, we remind ourselves every day that we serve a higher purpose. It's not about money. It is about what money means. And therefore, tax policy and administration is privileged work. We remind our employees every day. Ultimately, it is that which enables sustainable economic development and prosperity. It has transformative impact, particularly on the lives of the most vulnerable, and contributes towards the broader social cohesion and well-being. Thank you. I think it was a session that could go on for another day, but you've given us the nuggets.